The sensor relay at the edge of the Calder Belt had not picked up anything new in 11 years. It sat alone in the dark, spinning slowly, sending the same quiet signal back to Earth every hour. Nobody expected it to find anything. That was why the operator on duty, a young woman named Priya, almost missed the reading when it appeared on her screen. A ship had come out of nowhere. No warning beacon, no distress call, no registration ping. Just a shape, cold and massive, drifting into the relay's scanning range like it had been pushed there by something unseen. Priya sat up straight and ran the identification scan twice, because the first result made no sense. The ship was the Wanderhome. That name had not been spoken with hope in over 20 years. The Wanderhome had left Earth on a mapping mission to the Outer Rim, the far edge of explored space where dozens of ships from many different worlds had entered and never returned. It carried 42 crew members. It was declared lost 18 years ago, after a decade of silence, and its name had become something people said with sadness, not surprise. Priya sent the alert up the chain immediately. Within the hour, a rescue cutter was dispatched from the nearest station, Halder Point, 3 days away by fast burn. The station commander, a heavy-set man named Wexford, watched the sensor feed with his arms crossed, unwilling to believe what his own screen was telling him. Ships don't come back from the rim, he said to no one in particular. Not after this long. Not ever. But the Wanderhome kept drifting closer, its engines cold, its hull dark except for a single flickering running light near the bow. When the rescue cutter finally reached it and matched its slow tumble, the crew saw the damage up close for the first time. Long scars ran down the ship's side, not the kind made by weapons fire or asteroid strikes, but something stranger, like the metal itself had been peeled back and grown over again in uneven patches. Nobody on the rescue team had seen anything like it. They cut through the outer hatch since the ship's systems did not respond to any hailing signal. Inside, the corridors were dark and silent, lit only by the rescue team's handheld lights. The air was thin but breathable. Frost coated the walls in places, and old equipment lay scattered as if it had not been touched in years, though nothing looked destroyed or ransacked. It was simply abandoned, the way a house looks when a family leaves in the middle of a meal and never comes back. They found him in the command chair on the bridge, wrapped in a thermal blanket that had clearly been repaired many times over. His name was Daniel Okafor, and according to the ship's old crew roster, he had been a junior navigation officer when the Wanderhome left Earth. Now, sitting alone in a ship built for 42 people, he looked 20 years older than his file photo suggested, his hair gone mostly gray, his eyes sunken but sharp, watching the rescue team the moment their lights hit his face. He did not scream or cry or fall apart with relief the way the rescue team expected. He simply looked at them and asked one question in a rough and used voice. "How long has it been?" When they told him, something in his face changed, not shock exactly, more like a private calculation being completed. He asked about the rest of his crew, and the medic on the rescue team, a careful older man named Eris, gently asked him the same question back. Daniel did not answer. He looked past them, down the dark corridor toward the crew quarters, and said nothing at all. They moved him to the rescue cutter for the return trip to Halder Point. He refused sedation, refused most of the food offered to him, and refused to explain what had happened out on the rim, no matter how carefully the questions were phrased. The only thing he said, over and over, quietly, almost like a habit rather than a message meant for anyone in particular, was the same 6 words. "Tell them the choir is counting." Nobody understood what it meant. Eris wrote it down anyway, because something about the way Daniel said it, flat and certain, made it clear he was not confused or delirious. He believed every word of it. News of the Wanderhome's return spread fast once Halder Point filed its official report. Within a day, every major human news network was running the story, and within 2 days, several alien governments allied with Earth had quietly requested access to the ship and its lone survivor. The Outer Rim had swallowed exploration vessels from at least 6 known species over the past century, and every one of those governments wanted answers that had been denied to them for generations. Administrator Ilsa Cade, who ran Earth's Outer Colonial Authority from a station orbiting Mars, read the report twice before calling an emergency session with her senior staff. She was not a woman who reacted quickly to anything, but the phrase written in Eris's careful handwriting at the bottom of the medical report unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. The choir is counting. She ordered Daniel Okafor moved to a secure human facility before any alien delegation could reach him first, not because she distrusted her allies, but because she understood, better than most, that whatever Daniel had seen out on the rim was about to become the most important secret in known space. And secrets that important had a way of getting people killed before they could be told. As the transport carrying Daniel broke orbit and turned toward the inner systems, he sat quietly by the window, watching the stars slide past, and for the first time in 26 years, he allowed himself to close his eyes. Not to sleep, just to remember, carefully and completely, everything he had promised himself he would say when he finally reached someone who would listen. Neutral Station Verity floated exactly between three borders, human, Thren, and a smaller allied species called the Astari, which was the entire reason it had been built that way. No single government controlled it, which made it the only place both humans and their alien allies agreed to meet without an argument breaking out over who had jurisdiction. It was here that Daniel Okafor was brought, 11 days after his rescue, to answer questions that half a dozen governments were desperate to ask. The room they used for the debrief was plain on purpose, a round table, soft lighting, no weapons visible anywhere, though everyone in the room knew security was watching from behind the walls. Administrator Cade sat on one side with two of her aides. Across from her sat Counselor Vantis Rowe, a senior diplomat from the Thren Assembly, tall and thin in the way most Thren were, with pale gray skin and eyes that never seemed to blink at the wrong moment. Vantis had spent 30 years working alien relations, and he had a reputation for patience that bordered on unsettling. Daniel sat at the end of the table, dressed in plain gray clothes provided by the station, his hands folded in front of him. He looked calmer now than he had on the rescue cutter, but there was something guarded in the way he watched the room, like a man counting exits out of habit rather than fear. Mr. Okafor, Vantis began, his voice smooth and careful. On behalf of the Thren Assembly, I want to thank you for agreeing to speak with us. We understand this must be difficult. You don't understand anything yet, Daniel said. Not rudely, just plainly, like he was correcting a small mistake. That's why I'm here. Administrator Cade leaned forward slightly. Then help us understand. Start with the data core. Our engineers say the Wanderhome's core is still intact, but locked behind a personal encryption key. Yours. It's locked because it needs to be explained, not just read, Daniel said. If I hand it over and someone schemes through it without context, they'll get half of it wrong and the other half will scare them into doing something stupid. I've had 26 years to think about how this conversation should go. I'd like to do it my way. Vantis exchanged a glance with one of his aides, a shorter Thren official who had said nothing since the meeting began. We are willing to be patient, Mr. Okafor. But patience has limits, especially among governments who have lost ships and crews to the rim long before yours. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly at that. I know exactly how many ships have gone missing out there. I read the old logs before we left. 6 species, over 100 vessels across 3 centuries. Everyone called it bad luck, or radiation storms, or gravitational anomalies. I used to believe that too. And now? Kate asked. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. There's one person I want in this room before I say anything else. A xenobiologist. Human. His name is Halden Weiss. We trained together, years ago, before the mission. If he's still alive, I want him here. Cade's aide quietly checked a data pad and nodded to her. Dr. Weiss is currently on Earth, working at the Colonial Science Division. He can be brought here within 2 days. Then I'll wait 2 days, Daniel said, folding his arms. I'm not trying to be difficult. I just need someone in this room who will actually listen instead of just recording. Vantis studied him carefully, then gave a slow nod. Very well. We will reconvene when Dr. Weiss arrives. In the meantime, may I ask you one thing, Mr. Okafor, off the formal record? Daniel looked at him, waiting. The phrase you repeated to your rescue team. The choir is counting. Can you tell me, simply, what it means? For the first time since entering the room, something like real emotion crossed Daniel's face. Not fear exactly, but the kind of tiredness that comes from carrying something heavy for far too long. It means we're running out of time to understand something that has been watching us far longer than we've been watching it, he said quietly. That's all I'll say until Halden gets here." The meeting ended shortly after, and Daniel was escorted back to his quarters, a small but comfortable room with a window looking out over the slow curve of the station. He stood there for a long time after the door closed, watching the stars, before finally sitting on the edge of the bed. In the following 2 days, station security noted something odd in his behavior. He barely slept, but he was not restless. Instead, he sat quietly for hours, sometimes speaking softly to himself, going over what witnesses later described as lists, names, and numbers, as if rehearsing a speech he had given himself 2 decades to prepare. When Halden Weiss finally arrived on the station, exhausted from the fast transit but unwilling to rest before seeing his old friend, the two men were allowed a short private meeting before the second formal session began. Through the observation glass, security staff watched as Daniel stood the moment Halden entered the room, and for the first time since his rescue, his composure broke completely. The two men embraced, and Daniel's shoulders shook silently for almost a full minute before he stepped back, wiped his face, and quietly said the words that would be recorded in every report that followed. "I need you to believe me, Hal. Everything, even the parts that sound impossible." Halden, still gripping his old friend's shoulders, simply nodded. "I already believe you're alive. That's more impossible than anything else you're about to tell me." Behind the glass, Administrator Cade and Counselor Van Tis Rowe watched in silence, both of them aware that whatever Daniel Okafor had carried home from the Outer Rim was about to be spoken aloud for the very first time. 26 years earlier, the Wanderhome had crossed into the Outer Rim carrying 42 crew members and a mission that sounded simple on paper: chart the unexplored edge of known space, log any habitable systems, and return within 4 years. Daniel Okafor, then 29 years old, had been the ship's junior navigation officer, the kind of job that mostly meant checking numbers other people had already checked. He told this part of the story slowly, sitting across from Halden and the small group allowed back into the room, choosing his words like a man walking across thin ice. The first 2 years had gone exactly as planned. The Wanderhome mapped 17 new systems, found 3 worlds worth flagging for future colonization, and sent regular reports back through relay buoys along their route. The crew had been in good spirits. Daniel remembered a woman named Priest, the ship's chief engineer, who had a habit of singing old Earth songs badly on purpose just to make people laugh during long shifts. He mentioned her name carefully, like it cost him something to say it out loud. The trouble began in the 3rd year, when the Wanderhome entered a region of space that did not match any of their charts, despite having been surveyed twice before by unmanned probes decades earlier. The stars were in the wrong place. Not by much, a few fractions of a degree, but enough that the navigation computer flagged an error and refused to trust its own readings. Daniel remembered running the calculations by hand 3 separate times, certain he had made a mistake, before realizing the mistake was not his. It felt like the space itself had been slightly rearranged, Daniel said. Like someone had moved the furniture in a room you knew well, just enough that you kept bumping into things that shouldn't have been there. Communications with the relay buoys began failing shortly after, first with static, then with total silence. The captain, a steady woman named Reyes, ordered the ship to hold position while they attempted repairs, unwilling to press deeper into a region that no longer matched their instruments. It was during this holding pattern that the first crew member vanished. His name was Okonkwo, a supply technician, last seen doing a routine inventory check in the cargo bay. When his shift partner went to relieve him 20 minutes later, the bay was empty. No forced entry, no struggle, no distress call. His tools were still neatly organized on the workbench, mid-task, as if he had simply stepped away and never come back. The ship's internal cameras, reviewed frame by frame, showed him standing at the workbench in one frame, and an empty room in the very next frame, with no gap, no glitch, no movement captured in between. "We searched the entire ship twice," Daniel said. Captain Reyes thought maybe he'd had some kind of breakdown, wandered into a maintenance shaft and gotten stuck somewhere the sensors couldn't reach. "We searched for 2 full days. There was nowhere left to look." Halden, listening carefully, finally spoke. "And after that, it kept happening," Daniel said. "Never more than 1 person at a time, never with any warning. Sometimes days apart, sometimes only hours. People vanished from locked rooms, from crowded corridors, once from the middle of a training exercise with 6 other crew members standing right next to them, none of whom saw or heard anything at all. The room was silent except for the quiet hum of the station's air systems. Counselor Vantis Rowe, who had remained quiet through most of the account, finally leaned forward. Did the crew attempt to leave the region once the disappearances began? Immediately, Daniel said. Captain Reyes ordered a full retreat the same day the second crew member disappeared. But the ship's engines wouldn't respond to full power, no matter what the engineering team tried. It was like something was gently holding us in place, not damaging the ship, just refusing to let it leave. We were never attacked. Nothing about it ever felt violent. It felt patient. Over the following months, according to Daniel, the crew dwindled steadily, dropping from 42 to 30, then to 20, then to single digits, each loss chipping away at the group's discipline and sanity in equal measure. Some crew members stopped sleeping. Others became convinced they could hear something, faint and layered, like distant singing just at the edge of hearing, always somewhere just outside a locked door or down an empty corridor. That's where the name came from, Daniel said quietly. Someone started calling it the choir, half as a joke at first, because of the sound people kept describing. It stopped being a joke pretty quickly. Holden asked the question everyone in the room wanted answered. Why you? Out of everyone on that ship, why were you the one it never took? Daniel was quiet for a long moment before answering. I don't fully know, but near the end, when it was just me and 2 others left, I started hearing it too. The singing. And unlike the others, I could understand, in a way I still can't properly explain, that it wasn't trying to hurt us. It was trying to understand us. Learn us. And for whatever reason, when it reached into my mind the way it had reached into everyone else's, it couldn't finish whatever it was doing. Something about how I think, how humans think, it kept slipping off, like trying to grab smoke. Administrator Cade, who had remained mostly silent throughout the account, finally spoke, her voice careful. Mr. Okafor, are you saying an entire alien intelligence attempted to erase you the same way it erased the others, and failed? Daniel met her eyes directly for the first time since the meeting began. I'm saying it tried for 6 years. And it never stopped trying, right up until the very end, when it finally understood something that changed everything. That's the part one still need you to hear. Nobody in the room moved as Daniel Okafor unlocked the Wanderhome's data core for the first time in 26 years, using a personal key that only he had ever known. The core had been brought to Station Verity under heavy guard, sealed inside a reinforced case, and now sat open on the table between them, its old lights flickering weakly as it powered on for the first time in decades. I need everyone to understand something before I play this, Daniel said, his hand resting on the case. What I'm about to show you isn't a threat. It's not a declaration of war. It's a warning, and the being that gave it to me had every opportunity to destroy me instead, and chose not to. Administrator Cade folded her hands on the table. Then let's hear it. The recording that played was not a voice in any language anyone recognized. It was closer to layered tones, rising and falling together, similar to the singing Daniel had described, but organized now, deliberate, clearly meant to be understood rather than simply heard. Alongside the audio, the core displayed a slow stream of translated text, which Daniel explained had taken him nearly 4 years alone on the drifting Wanderhome to painstakingly piece together, using nothing but patience and the fragments of understanding the entity had left inside his mind. The translation, displayed line by line on the screen, read simply, "We do not hunt to destroy. We hunt to remember what should not be forgotten. Your kind has grown loud again, after a long and necessary silence. We are waking fully for the first time in an age, because the crossing grows crowded, and crowded things must be counted, understood, or removed. We remove those who could not be understood. This one, we could not finish removing. This one, we release, to carry the counting forward. Tell them. The choir is counting, and the counting has begun again." The room stayed silent for almost a full minute after the recording ended. Counselor Vantis Rowe was the first to speak, his voice quieter than Daniel had heard it before. "You are saying this entity, the choir, has been deliberately erasing every ship that enters the outer rim, human and alien alike, for centuries, and it considers this an act of preservation rather than aggression." That's how I understood it, yes, Daniel said. From what I pieced together, the choir isn't a single creature the way we'd think of one. It's closer to a very old, very slow intelligence spread across that entire region, something that has existed there long before any of our species learned to build ships at all. For most of its existence, almost nothing crossed into its territory, so it stayed dormant, quiet, barely active. But over the last century, as more species developed faster ships and pushed further out looking for new systems to claim, that quiet has been broken again and again. Halden, who had been reviewing the translated text carefully, looked up. It said it hunts to remember what should not be forgotten. What does that mean? I asked myself that same question for years, Daniel admitted. The closest I ever came to understanding it was this. The choir isn't erasing ships out of hatred. It's protecting something, some old memory or old order it's afraid of losing if too many outside minds start pressing into its space at once. Every ship it took, it absorbed completely, memories and all, as a way of understanding the strangers well enough to decide whether they were a danger. Most species, it decided, it could not safely understand or predict, so it removed them entirely, quietly, without ever letting the wider galaxy know why. Administrator Cade's expression had grown noticeably tense. And humanity? With me, it couldn't finish the process, Daniel said. I don't fully know why, and neither did it, based on what I understood from the message. But because it couldn't finish erasing me the way it had erased everyone else, it changed its plan. It let me go, specifically so I could carry a warning back, instead of simply staying silent the way it always had before. Vantis leaned back slowly in his seat, processing. A warning that the counting, as you call it, has begun again. Yes, Daniel said. And based on everything I experienced out there, I believe that means increased activity along the entire outer rim, not just where the Wanderhome was lost. More disappearances, more ships going dark, possibly across multiple species territories at once, as the choir wakes further and begins actively reassessing everyone pushing into its space. The room fell into a heavy, uncertain silence. Cade finally spoke, choosing her words with obvious care. Mr. Okafor, I have to ask this plainly. Is there any chance this message could be a manipulation, something designed to make us pull back from the rim, or worse, provoke us into some kind of unified military response? Daniel shook his head firmly. I asked myself that for 26 years too, Administrator. But think about it. If the choir wanted us gone, or wanted us afraid enough to attack blindly, it could have kept me silent, or twisted my mind the way it did every other crew member. Instead, it let me keep enough of myself to understand it, translate it, and bring the message home intact. That's not the behavior of something trying to trick us. That's the behavior of something trying, however strangely, to be understood before it's too late for both sides. Counselor Vantis Rowe was quiet for a long moment before finally speaking to the room at large. If this account is accurate, and I have no immediate reason to believe Mr. Okafor is lying, then every species that has lost ships to the outer rim over the past 3 centuries deserves to know the truth we are hearing today. The question now is not whether we believe him. The question is what we intend to do about it, before the counting reaches shores far more crowded than a single lost survey ship. Across the table, Daniel Okafor sat back for the first time since the meeting began. The weight of 26 years finally, partially, lifted from his shoulders, though he understood better than anyone in that room that the hardest part of his mission was only just beginning. 3 weeks after Daniel Okafor's message became known to every major government in Allied space, the response from the Thren Assembly and its partner species had been, in Daniel's own private words to Halden, exactly what he had feared. Endless meetings, careful statements, requests for further study. Not a single ship sent, not a single decision made. While committee after committee debated jurisdiction, risk, and the political cost of acting on the word of one exhausted human survivor. Administrator Ilsa Cade watched the delays with growing frustration from her office on the Mars station, reading through transcript after transcript of assembly sessions that circled the same questions without ever reaching a vote. She understood the caution. Sending ships toward a confirmed threat that had erased over 100 vessels across 3 centuries was not a decision any government made lightly. But she also understood, better than most in that room, that caution had a cost measured in time, and time was the one thing Daniel's message suggested they did not have. She called Daniel to her office personally, late one evening, after most of the station had gone quiet for the night shift. He arrived looking better than he had weeks earlier, some color back in his face, though the tiredness in his eyes never fully left. "The assembly isn't going to move fast enough," Cade said, without preamble. "Not while they're still arguing over whether your account is credible enough to justify risking a diplomatic incident with a species they can't even properly define." "I know," Daniel said simply. "I sat through 6 of those sessions myself. It's like watching people argue about the color of a fire while the building burns down around them." Cade studied him carefully. "I want to send a ship back to the rim. A small one, human-crewed, with you aboard if you're willing, to attempt direct contact with the choir before the situation grows any worse. I won't pretend this isn't an enormous risk, both to the crew and to my career if the assembly finds out I acted without their approval. But I think you already know that, and I think you're the only person who could actually make it work." Daniel didn't answer right away. He walked slowly to the window, looking out at the dark curve of Mars below the station, before finally speaking. "I've thought about going back every single day since I got home. Not because I want to, because I think I'm the only person alive who has any real chance of talking to it instead of just running from it. If I say no, and the counting keeps spreading unchecked, I don't think I'll be able to live with that either." "Then you're in," Cade said quietly. "I'll need to move fast, before the assembly catches wind of it and shuts the whole plan down out of caution." The ship chosen for the mission was a mid-sized survey vessel named the Clearwater, recently refitted with the fastest engines available and a communications suite designed specifically to record and analyze the strange layered tones Daniel had described. Dr. Halden Weiss volunteered immediately, refusing to let his old friend go alone a second time. The rest of the crew, 6 in total, was hand-picked from volunteers within the Colonial Authority, all of them fully briefed on the risks, all of them choosing to go anyway. Word of the mission reached the Thrin assembly only 2 days before departure, too late for any formal objection to stop it, though Counselor Vantis Rowe arrived at the departure dock personally, clearly displeased but unwilling to simply walk away either. "This is reckless, Administrator," Vantis said, standing at the base of the boarding ramp as the crew made final preparations. "The Assembly will see this as humanity acting unilaterally on a matter that concerns every species with losses on the rim." "The Assembly has had 3 weeks to act and hasn't moved an inch," Cade replied evenly. "I'd rather explain a decision after the fact than explain why we let more ships vanish while everyone argued about procedure." Vantis was quiet for a long moment, studying Daniel, who stood nearby checking supply crates with quiet focus, clearly trying to stay busy rather than think too hard about what waited ahead of him. "Then I am coming with you," Vantis said finally. "Not to interfere, to observe on behalf of the Assembly, so that whatever happens out there is witnessed by someone beyond your own government. If this goes wrong, at least the truth will travel further than one report." Cade considered the request briefly before nodding. "Fine. But you follow the crew's protocols once we're underway. This isn't a diplomatic tour." The Clearwater departed 2 hours later, slipping quietly out of the Mars system before news of its true destination could spread any further. The journey toward the outer rim took 11 days, and the mood aboard shifted noticeably the closer they came to the old, half-forgotten border where the Wanderhome had vanished decades earlier. Daniel spent much of the journey in the ship's small observation deck, reviewing the translated message over and over, along with fragments of memory he had never fully shared with anyone, preparing himself as best he could for a conversation no human had ever truly had before. Halden often sat with him in silence, understanding that some of what Daniel carried was not meant to be spoken, only endured. On the 10th day, the ship's sensors began registering the same strange readings Daniel remembered from decades earlier, stars shifting fractionally from their expected positions, background static replacing clean signal on every channel. The crew grew tense, checking and rechecking systems that no longer behaved the way they should. On the 11th day, as the Clearwater crossed quietly into the region the old charts marked simply as unmapped, unaware, everyone aboard fell silent at once, listening to something faint and layered drifting through the ship's communication systems, a sound none of them had heard before, but one Daniel recognized instantly. The choir was already waiting. The Clearwater drifted to a slow stop on Daniel's order, engines idling rather than fully shutting down, though he already suspected engine power would make little difference to whatever waited around them. Outside the viewport, space looked ordinary at first glance, scattered stars, empty dark, nothing visibly wrong. But the ship's instruments told a different story, registering faint fluctuations in gravity and light that matched nothing in any known physics model, exactly as Daniel remembered from the Wanderhome's final years. Everyone stays calm, Daniel said quietly to the crew gathered on the bridge. It doesn't attack in any way we'd recognize as an attack. It listens, and it learns, and eventually it decides. I need all of you to trust me on that, even when it stops making sense. Halden stood close beside him, his own instruments recording every fluctuation in the strange layered tones now clearly audible through the ship's open comm channels. Counselor Vantis Rowe stood a short distance away, silent, his usual diplomatic composure clearly strained by the reality of what surrounded them. "What do you intend to do?" Vantis asked quietly. "Talk to it," Daniel said simply. "The same way I learned to, near the end, when it was just me left. It's not going to respond to code or signals the way a normal contact protocol expects. It responds to a mind reaching toward it directly. That's the only channel that's ever worked." Before anyone could object, Daniel walked to the small, isolated communication chamber built specifically for this purpose. A plain metal room with a single chair and a direct neural link designed by the Clearwater's engineers based on Daniel's own description of what the Wanderhome systems had eventually adapted into. He sat down, allowed the technicians to attach the light sensors to his temples, and looked back at Halden through the chamber's small window. "If something goes wrong," Daniel said, "don't pull me out early. It has to finish, one way or another." Halden nodded, though his jaw was tight with worry. "Come back this time too." Daniel managed a small, tired smile. "That's the plan." The chamber door closed, and the link activated. What followed was not something the crew outside could see directly, only monitor through Daniel's vital signs and the strange fluctuations in the surrounding instruments, which spiked and calmed in slow, rhythmic waves over the following hour. Inside his own mind, Daniel experienced something closer to memory than sensation, vast layered impressions pressing gently against his thoughts the way water presses against a shoreline, patient, endless, curious rather than hostile. He felt the choir recognize him immediately, the same resistant shape in his mind it remembered from years earlier, the mind it had never fully been able to unmake. This time, instead of simply testing and retreating, it pressed further, and Daniel let it, understanding that the only way forward was to allow himself to be fully seen, rather than hiding any part of himself the way every instinct told him to. Through the strange, wordless exchange that followed, Daniel offered everything he could of what it meant to be human, not just facts and history, but the shape of human stubbornness itself, the refusal to disappear quietly, the tendency to keep pushing forward even into spaces that clearly warned them away, not out of arrogance, but out of a deep, stubborn need to understand rather than simply obey. He offered memories of loss, of the crew he had watched vanish one by one, of the 26 lonely years spent piecing together a message meant to protect others rather than seek revenge. In return, he felt, for the first time with real clarity, the choir's own ancient impressions, fragments of a memory stretching back further than any human or allied species recorded history. A long, careful stewardship over that region of space, broken again and again by outside intrusions it had never been built to fully understand or trust. It was not malice driving its actions, but a kind of deep, old exhaustion, a fear of being erased itself by forces it could not predict or control. Slowly, across that long silent hour, something shifted between them, not friendship, not alliance, but recognition. The choir understood, finally and completely, that this small resistant mind before it represented something it had never properly accounted for, a species capable of enduring loss without disappearing quietly into it, capable of returning not with weapons, but with a genuine offer to be understood. When the link finally released him, Daniel slumped forward in the chair, exhausted but conscious, and the chamber door opened immediately to Halden rushing in to help him stay upright. "It's done," Daniel said hoarsely. "It's not gone." It's still out there, still what it's always been. But it's not going to hunt blindly anymore. Not us. Not anyone. For now, while it decides what comes next. The Clearwater's instruments confirmed it slowly over the following hours, the strange gravitational fluctuations calming, the layered tones fading from the comm channels entirely, replaced by ordinary, quiet static. Counselor Vantis Rowe, who had watched the entire exchange from outside with growing disbelief, approached Daniel carefully once he had recovered enough to stand. I do not fully understand what happened in there, Vantis admitted. But I understand enough to know the Assembly needs to hear this directly from you. Not through a report, not through second-hand accounts. From you. Daniel nodded slowly, too tired for anything more than simple agreement. I'll tell them everything. All of it. But this time, I won't be doing it alone. The Clearwater turned back toward the inner systems 3 days later, carrying not just Daniel's account, but the direct testimony of Halden, Vantis, and every crew member who had witnessed the choir's presence firsthand. When the ship finally returned to Mars orbit, news of its safe return spread quickly across every Allied network, no longer whispered with fear the way the Wanderhome's return had been, but shared instead with a kind of cautious, hopeful relief. In the months that followed, the Outer Rim slowly reopened to careful, limited exploration, guided now by protocols built directly from Daniel's own hard-won understanding. Other species, long haunted by their own losses along that border, began quietly reaching out to Earth for guidance, not out of obligation, but respect, recognizing that it had been humanity's stubborn refusal to disappear quietly that had finally opened a door no one else had managed to open in 3 centuries of loss. Daniel Okafor never returned to deep space again after that final mission, choosing instead to spend his remaining years teaching new generations of navigators everything he had learned about patience, understanding, and the quiet courage it took to listen rather than run. But every so often, late at night, when the stars outside his window shifted just slightly out of their expected place, he would smile faintly to himself, remembering an old, patient voice that had once tried, in its own strange way, to understand him completely, and had finally, after all those years, succeeded.